If you believe respect shouldn't depend on rank or age, make sure to like and subscribe. And before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Because today's story comes from a place where pride met its match, and power learned what humility really means. They said she was too young, too polished, too corporate to walk into a military facility and give orders. The kind of woman who didn't belong among men who'd spent decades in deserts and danger. But when Elena Torres arrived at Falcon Ridge Defense Complex that morning, she wasn't there to fit in. She was there to find the truth. The guards barely gave her a second look as she passed through security, heels sharp against the cold concrete, ID badge flashing under the morning light. 29 years old, lead auditor, Global Defense Division. A title that held quiet power, though no one around her seemed to recognize it yet. To them, she was just another suit from headquarters, a clipboard, and a smile. Inside the compound, conversation stopped when she entered. A dozen men turned their heads, most wearing fatigues or combat polos, their arms crossed, their faces unreadable. On the wall hung plaques and medals for missions no one talked about. The air smelled like oil, coffee, and sweat, everything she wasn't. "Good morning," she said evenly. "Miss Torres, Internal Compliance. I'm here for the quarterly audit." Silence. Then, from the back of the room, a low chuckle broke out. Jack Hawk Dalton, former Navy SEAL, 46, built like a wall and twice as stubborn. He leaned back in his chair, boots crossed at the ankle, arms folded behind his head. "You're here to audit us?" he said, grinning. "Sweetheart, you sure you're in the right building? We fight wars, not balance sheets." The men around him laughed. One muttered, "Probably HR." Another whispered, "Hope she doesn't make us do paperwork push-ups." Elena didn't flinch. She simply walked to the nearest table, placed her files down, and began sorting through them as though she hadn't heard a word. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was precision. If you've ever seen someone underestimated before they even open their mouth, you know that kind of silence. It's not empty, it's loaded. Jack's laughter faded when he realized she wasn't reacting. "You got a name, Miss Paperwork?" he asked, trying again. She looked up, her brown eyes calm. "Miss Torres," she said. "And yes, Mr. Dalton, I have a name, a purpose, and clearance to review your last 6 months of operations." Something in her tone, controlled, unbothered, made the room go still for a moment. But then Jack grinned again, refusing to give ground. "We've had auditors before. Never lasts long. You'll see, this place runs fine." "I'm sure it does," she replied softly. "Until someone looks too closely." The words landed sharper than any insult. And though her voice stayed measured, every man in that room suddenly found something else to focus on. The floor, the papers, the coffee cup in their hand. The day went on. Elena reviewed files, scanned receipts, and compared training budgets against deployment logs. Her pen moved quickly, her eyes never missing a line. Every so often, she'd ask a question, short, precise, impossible to dodge. "Who authorized this vehicle purchase? Why was this invoice filed under tactical readiness when it lists entertainment expenses? Can someone explain why this training session was billed twice under 2 departments?" Every question sliced through the room like a blade. And each time, Jack would step forward, pretending to brush it off. "We make quick calls out here," he'd say. "We don't have time for bureaucracy." But Elena just nodded. And yet, it's the paperwork that keeps the missions funded. Funny how that works. By noon, the laughter had stopped. The men spoke in lower voices now, side-glancing her as she worked. Something about her composure made them uneasy. She didn't act like a bureaucrat. She didn't act like someone intimidated by rank. She acted like someone who'd seen arrogance before and knew exactly how it crumbled. When lunch rolled around, Jack leaned against the doorframe of her temporary office, arms crossed. "You really think you can tell us how to run this place?" he asked, voice low but edged. She didn't look up. "I don't tell people how to run things, Mr. Dalton. I just document how they've been run." "You don't know what it's like out there," he said, stepping closer. "The things we see, the choices we make. You've got no idea what real leadership means." She finally met his gaze. "Maybe not your kind of leadership, but I know what accountability looks like. It's the thing that keeps power from rotting." He stared at her for a beat, searching for some hint of weakness, and found none. Then, with a scoff, he turned and left. If you're watching this and you've ever had to stand your ground against people who doubted you, drop a fire in the comments. Because Elena? She wasn't just standing her ground. She was laying the foundation for a reckoning. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the compound walls, she closed her last folder, the pages filled with notes, questions, and inconsistencies. She slipped them into her case, snapped it shut, and glanced at the men still lingering nearby. They were quieter now, watching her not with amusement, but with the first flicker of concern. "Tomorrow," she said calmly, "I'll need access to your personnel files. All of them." Jack turned sharply. "You don't have clearance for that." Elena smiled faintly. "Don't worry," she said. "I do." She walked out before he could respond. The camera would linger, if this were a film, on Jack's face, the confidence cracking just slightly, his jaw tightening, the hint of something like doubt creeping in. That night, Elena sat by her hotel window, reviewing her notes again. The glow of her laptop illuminated her face, and outside, the faint hum of the bass rolled through the darkness. She whispered under her breath, "Courage takes many forms." Her father's words. He'd been military too. A man who believed integrity was the last true uniform. Back at the base, Jack stared at the folder she'd left on the table, his own signature staring back at him from a date he knew didn't add up. For the first time, he felt a pang of unease, the kind that told him the woman he'd mocked wasn't here to play games. Because Elena Torres wasn't there to prove herself. She was there to expose the truth, and she'd just started turning the page. The next morning, Falcon Ridge felt different. The laughter that had filled the corridors yesterday was gone, replaced by a quiet tension that clung to the air like static. Conversation stopped when Elena passed. Eyes followed her, curious, calculating, uncertain. Even the guard at the gate, the one who hadn't bothered to check her credentials before, now took an extra second to salute as she walked in. Inside the operations room, the men were already waiting. Files closed, shoulders stiff. Jack Dalton stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. The casual arrogance he wore yesterday had been replaced by something colder, controlled, but wary. "Morning," Elena said evenly, setting her briefcase down. "I appreciate everyone being here on time. We have a lot to cover." No one replied. She opened her folder and began laying out documents, her tone calm but deliberate. "I've reviewed your previous 6 months of operations. There are discrepancies that need clarification. We'll address them one by one." The first file landed in front of Jack with a soft thud. "Training funds, Section 14. Allocations listed for 28 personnel. Actual attendance? 19. Where did the excess funding go?" Jack's jaw tightened. "We had replacements in training. The paperwork probably just didn't catch up." Elena nodded slightly. "Possible. Though the signatures for those replacements appear to be identical copies of your own." He looked down. Sure enough, the same pen pressure, the same stroke pattern, duplicated. His voice hardened. "We were under pressure. I signed what I need to get my men the equipment they deserve." Elena met his gaze. "I'm not questioning your intent, Mr. Dalton. I'm questioning your compliance." A low murmur rippled through the room. One of the men shifted uneasily. Another glanced at the door, as if calculating an escape. She moved on. "Next, equipment requisitions. You ordered additional tactical gear 3 times within the same quarter, all marked urgent. 2 of those shipments never arrived. Care to explain why?" Jack crossed his arms. "Suppliers messed up. We filed reports." Elena turned another page. "You filed requests for reimbursement, not reports. And the suppliers you listed don't exist. The vendor numbers lead nowhere." That was the moment the room went still. Someone coughed, breaking the silence. Jack's face flushed dark red, but he said nothing. Elena didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice or smile. She simply kept going, piece by piece, exposing the rot beneath the surface. For every question he dodged, she had 2 more waiting. For every half-truth, she had evidence printed and highlighted. Hours passed. Papers piled up. The sound of her pen scratching the margin became the metronome of discomfort. Finally, she leaned back slightly, closing her folder. "I believe I have enough for now," she said softly. "I'll need to cross-verify these findings with headquarters." Jack slammed his hand on the table, the sound sharp and sudden. "You're making a mistake," he growled. "You don't understand how this works. Out here, we do what's necessary to keep the system moving. You think this world runs on your policies? It runs on results." Elena didn't flinch. "Results without accountability lead to chaos," she said. "You of all people should know that." He took a step forward. You're out of your depth. She rose from her chair slowly, her voice steady. Then maybe you should stop underestimating how deep that is. Their eyes locked, his full of challenge, hers full of quiet certainty. It was the kind of moment where pride and principle collided, neither willing to move first. Then, without another word, she gathered her papers and walked out. The echo of her heels followed her down the hall, like punctuation marks on a sentence no one dared finish. By evening, the whispers had spread through the facility. Some called her fearless. Others called her dangerous. A few, mostly the younger recruits, watched her with something close to admiration. They'd grown up hearing about integrity, but rarely saw it enforced. That night, Jack sat alone in the break room, the hum of the vending machine filling the silence. He stared at a photo tacked to the bulletin board, his old SEAL unit, all smiles and dust and pride. Back then, he'd fought for something clear, something noble. Now, staring at the audit papers on the table before him, he couldn't remember when exactly the lines had started to blur. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in," he muttered. It was Private Jensen, the youngest of the team, barely 21. "Sir," Jensen said quietly, "Miss Torres asked me for the personnel logs. I didn't know if I should give them to her." Jack looked up, eyes hard. "Did she show clearance?" "Yes, sir. Higher than command." For a long moment, Jack said nothing. Then he exhaled, a slow, bitter sigh. "Then give her whatever she asks for." Jensen hesitated. "Sir, she's not like the others. She's not trying to make us look bad." Jack's head tilted slightly, his expression unreadable. "What makes you think that?" "She looked at the photos in the hallway earlier," Jensen said. "The memorials. Most people just walk past. But she stopped. I saw her mouth a name. Captain R. Torres. That's on the plaque from the Kabul operation, sir." Jack froze. That name. He knew it. Everyone did. Captain Rafael Torres. Decorated Marine. Killed in action 15 years ago, saving a SEAL unit from an ambush. And suddenly, everything clicked. Elena Torres wasn't just some bureaucrat. She was his daughter. The room seemed to tilt. Memories rushed back. Reports of a Marine who stayed behind to cover their escape. The one they'd never met, but owed everything to. Jack sat down slowly, running a hand through his hair. The realization hit like a wave of shame. The man who'd saved his life had a daughter, and he'd spent the last 2 days mocking her. Meanwhile, across the compound, Elena was still working, her laptop glowing in the dim light of her temporary office. Her eyes were tired, but her focus never wavered. She wasn't auditing for promotions or politics. She was doing it for something deeper, something that bore her father's name. When she closed her laptop, she whispered, "You'd have hated what they've done with your honor, Dad. But I'll fix it." Back in the barracks, Jack poured himself a glass of water, staring blankly at the wall. He could hear the men murmuring outside, the sound of uncertainty spreading like wildfire. For the first time, the legendary SEAL didn't feel invincible. He felt exposed. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring confrontation. And when it did, he wasn't sure which side of the line he'd be standing on, the one that protected his pride or the one that faced the truth. Because Elena Torres wasn't just an auditor anymore. She was the reckoning he'd been avoiding his whole life. The next morning, a storm rolled across Falcon Ridge. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down on the compound like a held breath. Inside the operations wing, every man stood tense, silent, waiting. The air felt different, heavy with the knowledge that something was about to break. Elena Torres walked in just after dawn, calm as always. Her black blazer was immaculate, her ID badge gleaming in the flickering fluorescent light. She moved with quiet purpose, every step echoing through the hall like a metronome of certainty. In her hand, she carried a sealed folder stamped with the Global Defense Division insignia. Jack Dalton was already there, waiting for her. He looked older than he had 2 days ago, eyes shadowed, shoulders tight. The swagger was gone. What replaced it was something harder to name: guilt, pride, maybe even fear. "Elena," he started, his tone low. "Before you say anything." She held up a hand. "Mr. Dalton, let's keep this professional." The room was filled with the rest of his team now, some standing, some seated, none speaking. Papers rustled softly as she set the folder on the table. "I've completed my investigation," she said, voice steady. "The findings have been verified and cross-referenced with headquarters. The discrepancies we discussed are confirmed: funding misappropriations, false reporting, and procedural violations. Jack's hands clenched at his sides. You don't understand. None of this was about greed. We made choices to keep this place alive. The system doesn't care about soldiers once they're out. We had to make it work. Elena nodded slowly. Maybe so. But the moment you altered those reports, the moment you signed someone else's name, you stopped serving the mission. You started serving yourself. He opened his mouth to argue, but she reached into her jacket and withdrew a badge, sleek, black, and marked with a gold emblem. When the light hit it, the room seemed to hold its breath. Lead Auditor, Global Defense Division. Clearance level, Alpha. The title carried weight. Authority that went beyond Falcon Ridge, beyond even domestic command. It meant she didn't just audit departments. She oversaw entire military contracts across continents. Jack's face went pale. You, he started, then stopped, the words caught in his throat. She placed the badge on the table beside the folder. You answer to me now, Mr. Dalton. And this, she tapped the folder, is being forwarded directly to the Pentagon's Integrity Board. The room went silent. One of the younger recruits, Jensen, stared at her with wide eyes, the realization dawning. He'd told Jack last night who she was, but no one else knew yet. Jack swallowed hard. You could have just turned us in from day one, he said quietly. Why drag it out? Why make a show of it? Elena's expression softened, just slightly. Because I needed you to see it yourself. I didn't want to destroy you, Jack. I wanted you to remember who you were before you started cutting corners. For a moment, the old soldier looked broken. He turned away, hands on his knees, breathing shallowly. You think I don't remember? He said, voice trembling now. You think I don't wake up every day trying to keep the men alive, trying to keep the system from eating us alive? You don't know what it's like. She cut him off, but gently. I do. My father knew. Jack froze. Slowly, he turned toward her. Your father, Captain Rafael Torres, she said softly. Kabul. 15 years ago. The name hit him like a punch. The rest of the men shifted, looking at each other, confused, until realization began to ripple through them too. Jack's voice cracked. He saved us. Yes, Elena said quietly. He saved you. And all he ever asked was that his name meant something. That his sacrifice would stand for honesty, for duty, for accountability. But somewhere along the way, you let that go. Jack lowered his head. For the first time, the man who had faced bullets without blinking couldn't meet someone's eyes. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, unhooked the insignia patch from his shoulder, and placed it on the table in front of her. For what it's worth, he said, his voice hoarse, your father would be proud of you. And ashamed of me. Elena looked at the patch, black and gold, worn around the edges, and nodded once. I didn't come here to take your pride, Jack. Just to remind you where it came from. He gave a small, bitter smile. Guess I needed that reminder. She gathered her papers, slid the badge back into her jacket, and closed her case. Before she turned to leave, she paused. The report will be filed by the end of the day. I can't change what happens next, but I hope you'll use what's left of your name to make it right. Jack nodded, eyes downcast. Maybe I will. As she stepped out into the open air, the wind cut through the compound, sharp and cold. The flag above the main gate flapped hard against the sky, loud, defiant, alive. She stopped for a moment, looking up at it. In that sound, the cloth snapping, the wind roaring, she could almost hear her father's voice again. Courage takes many forms, Mija. A faint smile touched her lips. Yeah, she whispered. It does. Behind her, the men stood quietly at the door, watching her go. For the first time, not one of them laughed, not one smirked. They simply watched in silence, the way soldiers do when they've seen something they can't quite put into words. When Elena reached the gate, the guard saluted her, a real salute this time, not perfunctory, but sincere. She returned it without hesitation, then stepped through, her silhouette fading into the morning light. Inside, Jack looked around the room that had once been his fortress. The papers, the numbers, the laughter, it all felt small now, hollow. He reached for the plaque on the wall, the one with Captain Rafael Torres's name. His fingers brushed the engraved letters, and for the first time in years, he whispered, "Thank you." At headquarters, weeks later, the report from Falcon Ridge landed on the director's desk. Attached at the bottom was a handwritten note from Elena. Integrity is the quietest form of strength. My father taught me that. I hope this reminds others too. And somewhere out there, across the world, another young officer would read her name on a memo and remember the woman who proved that leadership doesn't always come from rank or medals, but from the courage to do what's right when no one else will. Because in the end, Elena Torres didn't just uncover corruption. She restored honor. And that was her father's legacy fulfilled.